Hi, this is Justin, your host at Reclaiming Christendom. Today, we have a friend of mine and a fellow here at Reclaiming Christendom, the legendary Bob of Speaker's Corner. And Bob is going to tell you about what is going on in Nigeria. Tens of thousands of Christians are dying, and the media is not even covering it. And Bob is going to explain to you why this is. And in addition, he's going to tell you about liberal secular democracies like the United States, the UK, and many other European countries, and why they are susceptible to the march of Islam. He's going to tell you what is it about them that make them so susceptible to this. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. We've got a lot of great videos coming up, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Now let's hear what Bob's got to say.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are in the world. Bob of Speaker's Corner, and I am a fellow of Reclaiming Christendom. I work as an evangelist, primarily based in London, but through social media and things like Zoom and other means, I'm able to work with and for groups around the world. And this is part of a series known as Dispatches from England. And it's my commentary upon the situation in Nigeria and the fact that the American president on the 25th of December launched strikes against ISWAP, which is Islamic State West African province. So Nigerian Christians have been persecuted by Islamist groups like Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa province, amongst others, as well as Fulani militants for decades now. I remember first hearing about this right back in the year 2000. And so it has been a quarter of a century of constant persecution and discrimination against Christians. And this is something that has gone on even before I heard about it. So it's obviously gone on for a lot longer. And when we look at what's been happening, if I quote to you some of the findings by Open Doors, which is an organization that helps persecuted Christians. Open Doors observes that Nigeria is one of the most violent places to live for Christians in the world today, with violence being carried out by Boko Haram and ISWAP, who've targeted Christian buildings, Christian communities, and whose intense attacks against the Christian population have been inspired by a deep-rooted hatred of Christians, a desire to force them out of, in quote marks, Muslim areas, and to seek to try and force them in indirect ways to convert to Islam. In North Nigeria, 12 states have implemented Sharia law, Islamic law, which creates a discriminatory system of laws against Christians, turning them into second-class citizens of those 12 states, as well as attacks by Fulani Islamist militants who launch their attacks from forested areas and have been known to attack schools and churches on Sundays, kidnapping children and women who they then ransom or force into Islamic sexual slavery, and has wiped out entire Christian communities. And this has caused great uncertainty. And this violence has spread from the north to the center. And, you know, if it hasn't already, it will start touching the southern states of Nigeria. Tese Matthew, who is displaced by the violence of extremists and detailed one instance where militants attacked a Christian community, said this: "Some people selected to sleep in the stores in the market. So the extremists burned down the stores with people inside together with their goods." This is the kind of horrific violence that Christians have suffered for decades. And Church Times reports that, and I quote, "Without swift action and an end to global silence, Christian martyrdom in Nigeria may double in 2026. And that's a quote from the charity Release International. Church Times goes on to point out that persecution trends, which is the publication of Release International that reports on the persecution of Christians, states that in-depth first-hand reflection by the organization's partners on the ground reveals the following. In the first 220 days of 2025, more than 7,000 Christians were killed in Nigeria. Hundreds more were kidnapped, tortured, or displaced, and that Nigerian NGOs, the International Society for the Civil Liberties and Rule of Law, points out that Christians face severe and escalating forms of persecution, specifically in northern Nigeria. Now, this is taken mainly in the form of militant attacks by the aforementioned Boko Haram and ISWAP and the Fulani herdsmen. And the Fulani militants have been behind a wave of attacks in the Plateau and Benue states, which have left more than 200 Christians dead and thousands more displaced. A Release International partner, who's a priest for the Church of Nigeria, the Reverend Mark Dumukan, said, "These include targeted killings, the burning down of churches, the kidnapping for ransom, forced displacement from farmlands and villages, often framed as farmer-herder clashes," and more on that later, but with clear religious motivation against Christian communities. Now, this kind of persecution that has been going on for decades is something that we as Christians have to wrestle with in a very real way. It cannot be the case that as Christians we simply go on as normal, ignoring the plight of our brothers and sisters, saying that it's too far away or that it's not our concern. And so I welcome the strikes by President Trump and the United States of America against ISWAP. And I call, along with Reclaiming Christendom, for the American government to intervene more and more robustly in what is happening in Nigeria, including convincing the Nigerian government to allow America to arm and train Christian militias across the north to defend themselves, and to incorporate such militias into the Nigerian state response to the Islamist threat. The sanctions and arrest warrants to be issued against certain elements of the Nigerian state that are clearly in bed with the Islamist insurgency in the north, and that there should be further strikes by the American military directly against these Islamist movements, as well as the creation of Christian regiments specifically Christian regiments within the Nigerian armed forces, who can be directed to prosecute the war against the Islamist threat in North Nigeria. If the Nigerian state doesn't do that, then I openly call for the American state to work with its international partners to see the separation of North and South Nigeria. Now, these attacks against Christians in North Nigeria have been downplayed by the usual suspects, the BBC, the Guardian in British media, who've attempted to cast aspersions upon the figures of the number of deaths within Nigeria of its Christian community, to suggest that Christians are not being specifically targeted, and that actually, as was stated earlier, that these are clashes between herdsmen and farmers. This are lies by a lamestream left-wing media that made themselves the mouthpiece of Islamist movements in Palestine, and most recently the mouthpiece of the Islamist regime in Iran. The reason being that it does not fit the narrative of the liberal mindset, which views all religions to be the same, teach the same, to have the same values, and that all religions can be equally the cause of such terrorism. And to speak of a contest between Christians and Muslims, between Christianity and Islam, and to talk about solidarity with persecuted Christians in Nigeria would cause trouble to the multicultural political project that is being pushed across the English-speaking world, no more so than in the United Kingdom. However, as Christians, we do not take our cues from modern culture. We take our cues from apostolic teaching. And in 1 Corinthians 12:26, in a glorious and beautiful passage in which the Apostle Paul describes the church as a living body united to itself with many members and parts, but working together as a singular whole, we read in 1 Corinthians 12:26 the following: "And if one member suffers, all the parts share the suffering. If one member is honored, all the members share in the enjoyment of it." And that's from the Amplified version of Scripture. Christians in Nigeria are suffering, and this has to be the concern, not just of all Nigerian Christians, but also it must be the concern of all Christians across Africa, all Christians across the English-speaking world, and across the ecumenical church as a whole. The whole Catholic Church, universal, has to respond to alleviate and to bring to an end immediately the suffering of our persecuted brothers in Nigeria. Platitudes are not enough. Prayer meetings are not enough. Sending money to groups that stick a plaster over a gaping wound, as many well-meaning organizations that help the persecuted church do, is also not enough. We Christians must be more ambitious. We must have a bigger vision. The plight of the Christians in Nigeria is symptomatic of the plight of Christians in many other parts of the world. One thinks of Christians in Syria, Christians in Burma, Christians in the Sudan, Christians in Ethiopia, Christians in Iraq, Christians in Lebanon, Christians in Palestine, Egypt, and Pakistan, amongst many others. No one is coming to help the church. The church must find ways to help itself. And I want to say that this does not exclude the Nigerian Christians from responsibility to deal with their own problems. Nigerian Christians must disavow and reject the prosperity gospel that is proving to be such a distraction and a cancer to the church in Nigeria. It must replace that prosperity gospel with a theology that more adequately responds to the situations and the challenges of the Nigerian church, a theology that emphasizes liberation from persecution, solidarity amongst believers, and the dominion of the church over Sharia law. When Nigeria gained its independence from the British Empire in the 1950s, the Christians of Nigeria were not ignorant or foolish. They knew exactly what would happen following independence, that Islamists would seek to establish Sharia law. The Christians of Nigeria had inherited a secular constitution from the British and had placed all their chips on maintaining that secular liberal constitution as the bulwark against Islamization. That project from the 1950s to 2025 has failed. It failed because it always would fail, just as Christians are discovering in Michigan, America, in France, in the Parisian suburbs, in Germany, and here in the United Kingdom, where we, despite having a constitution that is Christian, nonetheless are functionally a liberal secular democracy. All of these countries are finding that they cannot stop Islamization from liberal secular grounds. And so we need to think of something new. We need to approach the problem from a new direction. And this is where Reclaiming Christendom comes in, because the Reclaiming Christendom movement is a movement that is seeking to cultivate within the mind of the Christian the necessity, the practicality, and the utility of establishing once again a Christian civilization across all former Christian lands. The church needs a state backer. It's something it hasn't had for centuries. We looked for a moment with hope at Putin's Russia, only to discover that Russia is the idol that is worshipped by Putin and his inner circle, which has led to the betrayal of Christians in Armenia, in Georgia, in Syria and other places, where actually Russia could have carved out for itself a role as the champion of Christians around the world. It has instead bowed the knee to a nationalistic jingoism of advancing Russian interests, even at the cost of Christian lives. We look at countries like Poland, who certainly seem to be following a form of Christian/liberal nationalism in their country, which is doing their country great good, because Christianity is the thing that should fill a civic society. And when it does, it does so to its prosperity. But Poland is yet to make its presence felt in any real sense on the international stage, or to become an advocate for Christians abroad. We look to Hungary, who has a department dedicated to the assistance of persecuted Christians, something we welcome, laud, applaud, and encourage all governments that wish to be more Christian to establish a similar department within their government structures. But Hungary's resources are limited, and its power and influence is not up to the task, though its contributions are most welcome. And so it is with joy and happiness that we celebrate and give thanks to God for Trump's intervention in Nigeria. The church needs a state backer because it hasn't had one for over a century. And we see from the policies that are coming out of Turkey, from the policies coming out of Iran until recently, the policies coming out of Saudi Arabia, amongst other nations that could be mentioned like Qatar, that when the state backs a religion, that religion and its influence can spread throughout the world. If we are to resist the influence of Qatar in London and over the United Kingdom establishment, we need a confessing state, a state that sees itself as Christian and views following Christ and being a disciple of Christ as being the most important thing. And so I invite you to join with the Reclaiming Christendom movement and help to establish and to build Christianity as a civilizational project that becomes the governing story by which our states and societies organize themselves, of which a part of that purpose would be to defend Christianity and spread the gospel and protect persecuted Christians around the world. Thank you.
There you heard from Bob. Christianity needs a state backer, a professing state. Let's hope the United States continues to push for Christianity and other countries come and help. As you've seen with Islam, professing states have helped the religion spread throughout the world. Christianity, as Bob said, needs the same. Please don't forget to subscribe. We've got a lot of great videos coming up for you. God bless.